Shalom Aleichem. It's Chafav today, the Yahrtzeit of Rebbe Yitzchak ben Reb Baruch Schneerson, the Rebbe's father. What greater kibbud avayim is there for us to celebrate this Yahrtzeit? To celebrate it by looking at who he was, when he was, where he was, and how it all played itself out here in America through our Rebbe and what he left for us to continue now. Let me begin by saying that I thought about an interesting comparison. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Rabbi Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, the head of Yeshiva University, the Yitzchak Chonon, known as the Rav. His father was Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, one of the sons of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, known as Reb Chaim Brisker. Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik was born in 1879 and he passed away in 1941, I believe on Dalet Shvat. Rebbe Yitzchak Schneerson was born in 1880 and he passed away in 1944 on Chafav. So one lived 61 years, i.e. Reb Moshe, and the Rebbe's father lived 64 years. So both were from the shtetl, from Russia. One came to America and passed away I think he came in 1929, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and he passed away in 1941. Rebbe Leivik had a very hard life in the sense that he remained with his people in Russia. At some point, there was talk about him becoming a Rav in Eretz Yisrael. I think I saw a letter even in Chicago they wanted him as a Rav, but it never came to be. Rabbi Soloveitchik on Dalet Shvat on his father's Yahrtzeit would give what was called the Yahrtzeit drasha, the Yahrtzeit lecture. 2,000 people filled Lampert Auditorium in Washington Heights, and you couldn't get a seat, standing room only. And it was a phenomenal experience. I spoke to people who were there, and half of the drasha was halacha, and half was agoda. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was, of course, such a charismatic speaker and orator, and it was a production. There was a tremendous production. There are tapes of it, and I encourage you to listen to some of it, and you'll get just a glimpse of it. But yet, it was relatively a solemn, docile event. Everyone kept quiet, pretty much, and the Rav spoke. Yes, and he entertained you for 4 or 5 hours. Tremendous. He entertained you, or longer. He had that ability. Our Rebbe celebrated the Yahrtzeit every year. I can remember as a young boy in the 1970s, going into the 80s as a teenager, as an older student, with a Farbrengen. And at a Farbrengen, there is life, there's energy, there's lechayims, there's nigunim songs, there's freilichkeit, animation. It tells you something about the Rebbe, and it tells you something about the Rebbe Yitzchak. And again, I don't say this, God forbid, to put down the Rav in any way, because it's not. It's just different. The Rebbe celebrated together with Hasidim and anyone else that wanted to participate and listen with a Farbrengen. So the Farbrengen becomes the Chafav. That's the way I grew up. What is Chafav? We didn't travel to Alma Ata, and God bless those that have the funds and do that. But we didn't go anywhere. In fact, we were usually in Camp Gan Yisrael in Parksville, New York. We were in camp as boys, and we would come in, and at the Farbrengen, Rabbi Shem Tov and the staff would put us all together, and we said l'chaim, and the Rebbe asked us many times to sing a niggin, and it was beautiful. The Farbrengen, compared to a drasha, a sermon, a lecture, is a very different energy. So that's something that I want you to think about as you listen to this clip, and think about the specialty of the day. Another point, and a little more historical, the Rebbe's father, Rebbe Leivik, was a Goin. Not only a Goin in Kabbalah, as the Rebbe himself wrote, but a Goin in Niglin, Talmud, a Goin in Chassidus, and also a Goin in leadership. He became, after the Frierdiker Rebbe was forced to leave Russia in 1927, he became ostensibly the kind of replacement for the Rebbe there. Now, I say kind of because the Rebbe was acting in full force from Riga, and then from America, from Poland, and from America. But nevertheless, who was the Rav, the rabbi, who was hands-on, who had a bold personality, and he didn't give in to the wishes and evil of Stalin and his people, the KGB, the NKVD, was Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Schneerson. Single-handedly. And he didn't need people to support him and to say he's good or he's bad or he's nuts or he's great. He did what was, in his opinion, the right thing to do. And we saw this by our Rebbe here in America as well. He didn't look for people to agree with him. If the Rebbe felt it's the right thing, he did it.
I agree.
And he took that from Rebbe Levi Yitzchak, from his father. Rebbe Levi Yitzchak was a Yid who had Mesiras Nefesh, who had self-sacrifice for Yiddishkeit in the hardest of times. And the proof is that in 1939, they finally got to him, and they sent him away for hard labor. And because of that, 5 years later, in 1944, he died from illness, starvation, and other such issues, which cut his life short. And the Rebbe says it. And the Rebbe is not ashamed to say that my father died in Golus, in exile, where he was, in Alma Ata, which was a little village. It was boiling hot with insects and such things all over, and disease and typhus and no food. And his mother, the Rebbe's mother, and Rebbe Leivik's wife, Rebbe Chana Schneerson, the self-sacrifice, she said, I want to go see my husband and live with her, although she could have lived much better, in much better conditions elsewhere. And she was with him till the end. So what we see from this, and what we take from this historical reality, is the importance of standing up. And this was a mainstay in the Farbrengens that I spoke about as I was growing up with the Rebbe in the 1970s. The Farbrengens were very animated, and the Rebbe, of course, always had his father's niggin, hey yadara yadara, hey yadara yadara, hey yadara yadara, hey yadara yadara yadara, that niggin. And many times he had us Hasidim repeat it 10 times, and he would make with his head, motioning that we should really get into it and repeat it again and again. This day, Chafov, the Rebbe would also make a siyum on a Masechta, on a tractate of Talmud, which is customary by many on a day of a Yahrtzeit of a parent to do that, and that's what he would do. So here we are, 2022, Tafshin Pei Beis, so many years later, and we celebrate the special day of Rebbe Levi Yitzchak. We have, Baruch Hashem, his writings, some of his writings at least. And I believe it was 1970 when the Rebbe said they should be published. They just, a few years before that, they just got a hold of them. They came from Russia somehow. And the Rebbe had them published, and he started to explain one of his father's comments on the Parsha each time that he farbrenged on a Shabbos. And usually he would say, my father wrote very shortly because of a shortage of ink, and he wrote in a most Kabbalistic way, and he didn't really share and explain what is the practicality of it. And the Rebbe deducted from his father's writings, he deduced from his father's writings what the relevance is in the practical world. And this has all been printed. And that too is fascinating, because here were writings that could have been left unknown, or even if they were known, why print them? It's Kabbalah, it's very Kabbalistic. Well, the last few years, a chavrusa of mine, Reb Shlomo Hamburger, and myself have been going through the Rebbe's father's letters to the Rebbe of the wedding. And my chavrusa put out a few svarim, a few books about that. And I could tell you, in delving deep into these things, it's fascinating to see his breadth and length and depth of Torah, all of Torah coming together in a 1 or 2 or 3 page letter is fascinating. Citing from the Talmud here, and referencing it with the concept of Kabbalah here, and then showing how the Alter Rebbe in his Chassidus says it his way. My Mashpir Reb Yoel Kahn once said, after studying Reb Leivik's writings and teachings very well, once it was published, he said, everything of Reb Leivik has its core, has its source in Chassidus, in Chabad Chassidus. He didn't make up ideas. He just used his vast knowledge of mysticism, of Kabbalah, and it's from that vantage point that he shared his knowledge of Chassidus. May God help, may Hashem help, that this day, Chaf Av, we take the strength to go with Are Yayara, hey, Yayara, Yayara, hey, strength, victory, resilience, Tidan Notzach. And we learn more of Reb Levi Yitzchak's Torah, his teachings, and we implement it as the Rebbe shared with us over the years, and it's printed. And through this, there will be V'kitzen V'rani Sheikh Oif Ofer. He, Reb Levi Yitzchak ben Reb Baruch Shneir, will be resurrected with everyone else through the coming of Mashiach, the Kor of Mamish, B'Yerushalayim, Mir HaKodesh. Amen v'Amen.